Hi everyone. Yes, so good morning. Welcome to an amazing new week. And yes, so this is Rabia Elise speaking. And once again, during this season, we want to have us voice for that is required in our generation. And with our discussion of stronger yes today, I have decided to do the Facebook Live on our discussion today to really allow us to be in the currentness of our generation's room, right? Our generation's room that has become that is our international platform that we voice on, and that is our platform that we allow ourselves to be in, that we are required to be in that one room that our generation is at. And what's stronger today, we will definitely be focusing on the familyness of our generation and that requirement for our generation to once again understand and to once again appreciate that is family, that we voice for what it is that we say concerning our generation. It is that we have learned, that throughout the years we have had our education, right? In our education rooms were different to every one of us, right? We had that opportunity to learn, that we were required to understand that our generation allows ourselves that opportunity to be in the room that we are required to be in when we accept where we are at in our season. It is that we have learned that acceptance is not necessarily that you agree with in season, but it is that you allow yourself to listen to what is it that the season educates us concerning our generation. What is it that our seasons allows us to listen to concerning where our generation finds themselves at. And we therefore allow ourselves to be in that is the current room of our season, right? The current room that our season is in is where our generation finds themselves at, listening at and listening to understand where we are required to be at, what the change that happens in our generations. It is that we have learned, we have discussed of last year, that our 2,000 years from today is that attitude that requires us to accept where we are at, but to learn what is the impact that our generation would make concerning our 2,000 years from today generation, that would look upon a season and says that, you know what, the familiarization of where I find myself at is the voice of someone else that has allowed that has allowed me to be part of where they are at and where they were at in their season. It is that we learn that our birthness in generation is that there is one voice, right? That our generation would have to in season familiarize themselves once again with what is our birth fact concerning our generation. What is one thing that we cannot exclude the other of, that is everyone's birthright in season. That is everyone's right to appear in season. That is everyone's right to not be deprived with where they find themselves at in this season. And there is everyone's right to say that, you know what, with all the differences in season, I've allowed myself to accept the season that requires me to accept myself and to accept itself with where I find myself at in this season. It is seasons allows us to listen to the different sounds of it. I am reminded of the spring season that really educates us concerning the softness of a voice, right? Concerning the soft appearance in season, concerning that is our every requirement to appear. It is that sometimes we have to familiarize ourselves with the environment in order to say, you know what, it is preparedness for something else. And therefore, in our generation, I do not only listen to myself, and I do not only listen to that I find myself at, but I listen to that is the quietness, the quiet listening requirement that we respond to it when we react concerning where we find ourselves at in our seasons. It is that we do not deprive one another of that opportunity that the universe has given every one of us to be part of the completeness of being born a human being on earth, right? It is that humanity would have to learn to listen to what is it that the universe requires us to abide with and to apply in our everyday lives when we look at our generation in its completeness, right? It is that our generation were educated years ago that this is a classroom and this is the different colors in a classroom. But our generation today are required to learn that the classroom has changed, and now the classroom are intertwined with one another, and therefore the introduction to the other is gonna be different than the introduction when you were a little child in primary school, and when you had to learn to be fine with where you find yourself at. It is that education that we have been educated about, but we are required to remind ourselves of that, and that is our birthright, to appear and to be fine with where we find ourselves at, with understanding that the rebirth of our generation is now I'm not the little girl or the little child in the room anymore, but now I'm the adult that has to learn that the same birthright is that same educative presence that is going to educate us concerning where we find ourselves at, now being the elder in the room, now being the parent in the room. But while we are the parent in the room, we abide to that requirement of understanding that a little child who were being parented became a parent. And while the little child became the parent in the room, that requirement to remind ourselves that we do not only think of our ways and our ways of that we were educated in our households, because the room is now one room and the house is now one house, and the colors might be different in the house, but that requirement of us in the room and that requirement of us being humanity on this earth is to understand and to accept that education that was protective concerning the challenges in the room, concerning the differences in the room, concerning the baby that had to learn to listen and had to learn to be able to explain itself in its season, that had to be able to listen and had to be able to then react concerning itself where the baby found itself at in season. It is that our generation is going to have to once again allow themselves to be the child in the room, but to also learn to know how to parent in the room, right? It is that we say that our children grew up very fast, right? And we are all now just in that we were ready to parent, and then the child was already ready to parent themselves. And then our generation had to learn to say that, you know what, such is this universe. It gave birth to us, and it has its right to birth and to parent itself, right? And in that season, even your child in your house educates you concerning where they find themselves at in season. And no parent would want to silence that education in their households. And that is the currentness of our generation that has been intertwined, where the child is now also parenting, where the young children are now also parenting us being elders. And while we have to allow ourselves to also learn so that they can be in that is the protective environment for that in the room called the universe, and in that called being human being on this very earth. And that is the birthright of every one of us, of every challenge that we have had, is that requirement that I want us to find ourselves at, with understanding the birthright concerning humanity, the birthright concerning the challenges that we currently have, and the birthright that requires us to understand the oneness of family in our room. Yes, so that's where we wanted to really introduce and start off with. And with saying that, I'm reminded of traveling to South Africa to a family gathering in 2020. While I traveled to South Africa 2019 December, we had a family party, and I remember the different parts of our family, of my father's family, right there that entered the room. And I remember us being in Makassar, Cape Town, and while we were there, we were all looking at one another, because we were now not only children, little children anymore, but we were now in that we are parents ourselves in a generation. And I remember the photo, I've shared the photo on my social page of us being together at that family reunion. And I remember how we were looking at one another, and with that mindset of the different rooms that we are at, and how the one cousin of me is Rastafari, the other cousin of me looked a bit traditional, and the other cousin of me looked exactly the same and I looked, and then Antoinette said her photo to us from England. And then we all were now in this one room, a family that is now my papa's side of family, that we have not had the opportunity to really engage with one another when we grew up. And at that family reunion in 2020, we had the opportunity to get to know one another in that is now family, in that I myself during those years I've really found myself in church lifestyle, and I was really looking at the one cousin with that mindset of tradition, and I was really allowing myself to listen. And I can remember how I wanted to deprive myself of introducing myself to this cousin, and how the cousin was also standing there and depriving themselves because I myself look exactly like Rabia those years. That looked like the church woman, and that looks like that type of person who would now really exclude in a season. And I remember sitting there and listening to the whole environment and to what is happening around us. And I remember the one cousin that came and said that, you know what, this is my sister. And then she introduced me to the sister that I was looking at, and that I thought, you know what, you look a bit very traditional, and I am not in a traditional mindset. And I remember just looking at her, and the cousin came, and the cousin said, this is my sister. And I introduced myself, and I learned at that moment, and while listening back into that season, that how often do we really sometimes exclude ourselves from the room while we are in an educative room, right? Our educative room in 2020 was a family reunion that you would say that family would be excited to meet family, and everyone would be excited to get to know the different colors of someone else, right? So if someone else would look a bit more traditional to me, then I would be a bit excited to get familiar with that type of person. But I remember the mindset that I was in during those years was a mindset of totally exclusion, right? A mindset where I wanted to be in my room, that what I have educated myself concerning my journey and concerning where I find myself at in my season. And I remember at that time when life gave me that opportunity to be introduced to someone else, to be introduced to that educative room that might to someone looks like a traditional room, but it is the complete colors of a generation, and it brings people together, and it removes any barriers, any misunderstandings, any miscommunications that there might be in the room, right? And such is our generation in general today. It is that our room today on this earth has got different requirements, right? It has got different colors. It has got different traditional backgrounds. It has got different ways of upbringing. It has got different religious backgrounds. But while we are still today in argument with ourselves concerning where we find ourselves at in the room, it is that hand that life gives you that is your birthright, that is your opportunity to once again be introduced to someone else in order to get to know where you find yourself at in your season. It is that when I looked at my cousin, I almost deprived myself of that opportunity to once again be introduced to myself so that I can once again understand where I find myself at in my season. And someone else had to intervene to introduce me and my cousin to one another so that we do not deprive ourselves from being in the currentness of our generation, that is the complete colors of acceptance, that is the birthright that we allow ourselves to be and to appear and to be fine with where we are at in our seasons. It is that we do not argue one another away. We do not disregard that it is someone else who's standing in front of me. We do not disregard the fact that this person was also born unto earth and also finds themselves in an educative season. We do not disregard the fact that colors in this season and colors in every season looks different, right? Colors in every season is that every representation, that every opportunity to notice what is visible to you, to listen to how you sense concerning what is visible to you, and to therefore accept the completeness of where you find yourself at. With that is your every opportunity to walk in the currentness of your educative season. It is that we can say that education to our generation is different. It is the color of family, and that color of family is that requirement that no one on this earth should deprive themselves of. It is every one of our opportunities to once again accept ourselves with where we are at, being part of this generation, and it is our opportunity to then prosper with that, with understanding and with accepting the completeness of what a generation voice, and of how a generation voice, when it voices in its different seasons, and that we are required to respond to it in our every reaction. And therefore we are gonna allow ourselves to understand the one color in the room during this year and during this season. It is and we can all say that it is an aggression color, because when we look at the different challenges the different countries has got, then we learn that aggression is in the room. But we learn that while aggression is in the room, aggression might be in the room because someone else might deprive themselves of being where they are required to be at in this season. And when someone deprives themselves, they sometimes do not deprive themselves because they want to, but they sometimes deprive themselves because of the room that they find themselves at. And such is the rooms of our generation. It is that with the one color, with the oneness of family, we understand the one voice that we all speak concerning, right? That we all speak from, and that we all speak within ourselves, right? It is that one voice that we call familiarization. It is that one voice that we say when we are somewhere that we are really not understanding, or we really can't hear clearly where we are at in our season. Then we have the opportunity to get familiar of where we find ourselves at in our season, so that we be in that is the one familyness of a generation. Once again, it is the voice of familiarization. It is a voice that you do not negotiate about. You do not negotiate yourself out of it. You do not negotiate your right to be fine and to be there. You do not negotiate your right to be protected in it, but you allow yourself to be familiar with where you find yourself at when a generation is challenged. You allow yourself to get familiar to what as family seems to you when you learn about the challenges in our different countries. You allow yourself to listen to when family speaks in different ways and in different languages. How do you allow yourself to be introduced to someone else in order to get to know you as being part of family in a generation? It is the one voice of familiarization that when we learn to have our baby steps, and when we were babies, our familiarization voice was not a voice that came when the parent was in the room, but the baby steps were taken sometimes without the parent being in the room. And that is the familiarization of where a generation would find themselves at, in that is the protective environment for our generation. That is one family. It is the parentingness of the universe that echoes concerning the baby that is now learning to walk. And while the baby learns to walk, the baby gets familiar with where they find themselves at by listening to, how do I respond with what I'm required to do? How do I find myself fine when I respond with what I'm required to do? And that familiarization response is called listening. How do we as a generation listen in our season? How do we as a generation that finds itself in the season of stronger, educating color, but also understanding that there is a lot of argument in our generation? How do we respond with that? That we learn that this is one family, but the only requirement that we have is to be protective concerning ourselves, because a family is once again being introduced to another family. It is that intertwinement of our young children with the parentingness in the room and the parents in the room that wants to parents in season, and that requirement for everyone who's the baby in the currentness of the womb of this universe to learn to know how to listen with that one voice of listening, with that one voice of learning how to react, with that one voice of learning how to get familiar with the environment that is happening around them, and with that one voice of accepting all the colors that are being introduced to them. It is there that we say that with our languages, there's different language differences. There's different educative ways that we were educated. There's different ways of parenting that the universe parented us concerning our generation. But while we are all in the differences, we understand that the uniqueness is that brings our generation into that completes us once again with the echoing voice that we are protective the one to the other, that we are protective concerning where we find ourselves at in our season, and that we remain to be protective with that we educate and that we are educated upon. It is that we learn that not one generation is going to deprive themselves of being where they are required to be at in their season. It is that not one generation is going to argue away what they are being taught concerning a generation, but we have that we have learned and have been educated, that is our rights and our wrongs concerning where we find ourselves at in a season. It is that our rights reminds us of that protective environment, right? Of when you apply that, there is gonna be the right concerning the choices that we make. Then we allow ourselves to be in a protective environment to make the choice that is the right choice, a familiarization choice for where we find ourselves at. And our wrongs are many times those argumentative discussions that we sometimes do not need to have with the other. Our wrongs are many times those disagreements that we sometimes do not agree with someone else's choice, right? Our wrongs are many times that to use someone else that looks at the situation, and to them the situation is not wrong, but the disagreement concerning the situation might be the wrong in the situation. And it is that we say what is gonna be the protective environment when we get familiar with where our generation voice from and where they are voicing it in this season. It is that we learn that there is no right and wrong, but if we are gonna be ignorant concerning abuse and concerning manipulation and concerning people being deprived and being made and being depressed in our rooms, then we are gonna be in that argumentative room that has a generation in battle, a generation in war, because of everyone's disagreement concerning where they find themselves at. And therefore our rights and our wrongs is that familiarization, that is that protective environment concerning the choices, that is that one requirement that we have on a daily basis. And that one requirement is when we learn that the wrong in a generation is that they deprive someone else from being fine, right? Then we're gonna have to say that in that season, you allow yourself to abide to that is the right in your season. You allow yourself to abide to that is protective in your season, that is the right that you were educated about when you were in primary school, with your household upbringing in your family house, with that is the right in your family house, right? And that the parent was always firm on that. When our parents educated us, our parents were very firm on it. It's non-negotiable, right? It is non-negotiable for us to apply that is protective for the other when we are in our family house, right? And when we are being introduced to one another, it is that protective environment that we do not negotiate about. That the argument can many times be that there is no right and that there is no wrong. But when we look at what is happening in our generation, then we learn to listen to what is the right and the wrong in the current circumstance of our generation, and we then abide to that is gonna be protective for where our generation finds themselves at. And that is the birthright of every one of us in our generation, the color of the birthness in a generation. It is that we do not deprive ourselves at. The color of the birthness of a generation. I want us to really focus on that because I'm really gonna just discuss that with us shortly. The color of the birthness of a generation. The color, that color that when you were educated concerning colors, right? There's bright colors, and then there was this colors that we did not want anything to do with, right? And it became our dress code, right? My dress code today is exactly that, right? The black with overruled with a color, with that attitude of a difference, right? It is that the color of the birthness of a generation. We then educated ourselves a generation that black and white means to us the darkest moments and the moments that we didn't want to talk about, right? And many people in our generation went to abide with that. That is, when someone has black and white and they go and run paranoia and they go and say that this now today means this and this and that. And then in the meantime, we are in a season while we are on social media, right? And while we are educating fashion, and while fashion is color, and while a woman speaks concerning the color that they wear in season, and while we are educating in season, and while we are speaking concerning the color in our season, we have that one education in the room that is the color of the birthness of a generation. It is that we wear our black and white with standing firm and strong concerning it, but we learn that someone else is manipulating your black and white when you wear it, right? It is that someone else has to be educated that black and white not necessarily means that something is going to happen and that this one is now going to react upon it, unless someone else educates themselves that this is what black and white means in our generation, and this is what our generation has been educated about, and this is traditional, and then our generation has learned to accept the completeness of understanding that the black and white is a color in the room, but the currentness is that person's birthright that are wearing the black and white, that they say they do not deprive themselves of their right to be appearing in the room in this season. It is that overrules with an attitude of a difference, that someone wearing their black and white says, I'm gonna be protective of where I find myself at in my season. And that when we understand that while a season while a generation are being educated concerning a season that they find themselves in, the color of the birthness of a generation is where our generation finds themselves at. It is that our generation are in a birth season where we are being educated concerning our birth, right? Concerning accepting where we are at, concerning not depriving ourselves from being fine, concerning not depriving someone else from where they are meant to be. It is then that color that are being added upon that brings that attitude, that requirements, that brightens that season, that sometimes is someone else's personality, that sometimes is someone else's reaction, that sometimes is what someone else says concerning themselves. It is that birthright that we are once again voice for that is the color of the birthness of a generation in season. It is that people of color to some people means that it is only speaking of a non-white person, right? And when Vogue started to educate, Vogue said, but people of color means the attitude, the every reaction of our generation. It is that every opportunity that everyone in a generation has got to voice for that is where they find themselves at in their season. And therefore, people of color is you allowing you to appreciate the completeness of what the universe have birthed you to be part of. The color of the birthness of a generation, it is to allow yourself to appreciate the completeness of what the universe has birthed every one of us to be part of. You allow yourself to accept the completeness of what the universe educates concerning a generation. You allow yourself to abide to the right and the wrongs concerning it. You allow yourself to get familiar with where you find yourself at in season. You allow yourself to get familiar with listening to what is it that our generation are saying concerning themselves, and where is it that they find themselves in with the color of our generation. And it is that the universe said you are part of this generation, and being part of this generation, you have been educated concerning all of these rooms. That is part of your every reaction, part of your every voice, part of your every appearing, right? And it is that is the color of the birthness of a generation, the birthness that a generation has been educated and birthed in. It is that when we look at Africa, we look at the mamas that sits with the babies, and we learn to understand that Mama Universe once again gave another baby, and the country is once again in poverty, and Mama Universe once again educates another generation, that this birthness is the color of that is that baby's birthright also, that baby's right to also be on this earth, that baby's right to also not be deprived on this day, that baby's right to also be fine in this season as being born a baby on this earth. And it is that we learn that this Mama and Papa Universe does not negotiate about the color of the birthness of a generation. How they educated is how they educated. How we find ourselves in our protectiveness concerning that is gonna be protective for everyone, that I do not go and abuse someone else because I find myself being educated in a room, but I understand that the protective environment that I am in is the protective environment that someone else is also required to be in. That I do not argue and say that people in argument is gonna be fine because it's an education room. No, I say that I feel protected where I'm at in my season, and therefore I would abide to that also is someone else's protection in their season. I do not disagree that the universe is educating, but the universe requires me to respond to that. That is someone else's birthright also. That is where I find myself familiar at. When I am fine, I always say let someone else also be fine, because it is our birthright. It is that we were educated that the house is one and there's no negotiations. The house remains one and no one should be deprived of it. That is where our generation would find themselves at once again in one voice. It is that education that we do not negotiate about. We do not argue about it, but we learn to understand that this house called this earth for humanity and this house called the universe for everything that we have been educated concerning the universe is that this house is one. We had one birthright to be part of it, and we do not negotiate it. We do not deprive someone else of it, and we understand to learn to listen that there's one voice, and that is that everyone has the opportunity to be there and to be fine with where they're at in their seasons. It is that the color that is visible to us in that discussion and in that is our birthright is the color that we allow ourselves to be part of, is the color that we say that we do not negotiate that is the protective environment for everyone. It is that we have learned that the voice and this universe echoes loudly, and everyone wants to have themselves and their families be fine when the voice echoes concerning our generation. It is that the voice that echoes is a sound of familiarization, is a sound of protection, is a sound that requires us to respond, and is a sound that is gonna have us react with where we are at. But I always say that when we get familiar with the sound in the universe, with the education in the room, we allow ourselves to learn to know how do we listen to the sound of the mama that speaks from the womb, within the womb of the baby. It is that that when Mama Universe and Papa Universe educates us, it is one voice, it is one sound, it is one reaction, and it is that protective environment of the baby in the room. And when the baby in the room gets familiarized with the room, the baby in the room understands the color that is the birthness of another generation, the color of a mama giving birth in a generation that has got all of these different colors, right? Some colors are but darker than the other, some colors are but lighter than the other, some colors are but acceptive to the other, and some colors are really sometimes that a generation does not sometimes want to be part of, but they find themselves here. And when they find themselves here and they do not agree with the choices, then they do not go and deprive someone else because of disagreement, but they learn to understand the familiarization of the womb. They learn to understand that the womb requires them to be familiar with where they find themselves at, with the sound of the baby in the room, with the sound of not depriving yourself in the room, with the sound of not negotiating your voice in the room, with the sound of not negotiating where you find yourself at in your season. That is the different seasons in the room, with the sound that is that one protective environment that the baby once again, when they are familiar with and when they are allowing themselves to get familiar to the sound in the womb and to the sound in the room, then they once again gave birth and give birth to another generation that arises in season. It is that we say that our generation are a stronger generation. Our generation are mentally right to be where they are at in their season, but our generation has got to learn to listen to the wind that blows, the spring season that comes forth, the autumn leaves that falls in season, and the summer season that comes with the brightness of the sun. It is that seasons intertwines with one another, and when seasons intertwines with one another, it once again comes to protect and to give birth to another generation in season. And while we allow ourselves to understand the birthness, we allow ourselves to learn to know how to listen. And with this, I just want to focus on how do we listen in our season. Yes, so listening is that requirement that we are gonna respond with, right? It is that requirement that someone else requires you to respond at in your season. Listening normally basically have a reaction. Listening goes hand in hand with a reaction, right? And I have always mentioned a few years ago on advocating with people of color. It is that you advocate for, that is where you're gonna find yourself at in your season. That you agree with or disagree with, it is your right and your wrong application and the familiarization in your season. And with mentioning the fact that how do a generation listens, we have allowed ourselves in primary school to learn to listen in quietness. That is that there's gonna be the language barriers, but we're gonna understand what it is that our response is going to have to be in season. It is that when we learn that our different countries have got different languages, right? And in some countries, some people are a bit more acceptive to their languages and how they accept that is their language, that they do not negotiate, that sometimes they do not want to speak English, and sometimes they do not want to get familiar with someone else's language, but they want people to sometimes listen to them also, to learn to understand what they are voicing in their season. It is not that they do not agree with it, it is where they are at in the season of education that they sometimes do not negotiate about, they sometimes do not negotiate concerning, and they sometimes do not negotiate that is their birthright, that is their language, that they accept that, and they want And they sometimes want someone else to understand that education room that they find themselves at, they sometimes do not negotiate with in season. It is that a generation had to learn that there was a reason why people were more acceptive and only wanting to accept their own languages, right? Only wanting to hold on to their languages. It is that people in our generation had to learn that in order to be able to look after the poverty in our generation, we would be able to learn to listen on their level, right? And on their level is not always going to be your best English. It's not always going to come out of the best vocabulary of the dictionary. But it is gonna be that every language, that is how someone else is gonna react when they really provide for that. That is the poverty side of our generation. It is that our elderly parents were very firm on. They remain with their languages because someone else would need to get to their level in order to know how to listen to the requirement in their countries, in order to know how to respond to that. That is gonna be responding in a protective and not responding because you want to respond, right? But responding with that is kindness, that is taking care of someone, that is nurturing, that is protective of someone, that is really providing for that is sometimes really required, right? Without wanting people to get onto your level of English language, and to your level of education, and to your level of where you find yourself at in your season. Our elders were very firm on their birth, right? The color of the birthness of their generation that they didn't negotiate about. That is their different languages, and they do not want to speak English because people are going to get to their level in order to know how to listen properly, in order to know how to be there in the currentness of one house that is called one generation. It is that one generation can be firm on their different languages and they can stay in their different languages, but the oneness is that kind environment that none of our elders negotiated about, that none of our elders wanted that education in the house, that all of our elders said we're going to stay on our level and your young children are going to learn to know how to listen and how to not deprive yourselves from also being in that is the one house, that is that introduction, that when y'all are introduced to one another and when y'all travel the world and someone else's languages are different, then y'all gonna learn to know how to accept someone else in the room rather than wanting to deprive them. It is that we said that our generation has got stunning colors that they're educating about, but in the other part of our generation there's arguments, there's war, there's abuses, there's depression, and it is that oneness that completes us is our generation that once again learns that while we are in a moving pace of educating colors, we do not deprive someone else who's maybe going through a challenge and who's maybe finding themselves in a different part and different season in our generation, but we understand the color of the birthness of a generation in season is the familiarization of learning to know how to listen. And when we learn to know how to listen, we also learn to understand that we do not listen from anger, that we do not listen to hate on someone else, that you do not listen to be abused or to be abusing someone else, but you listen in that completeness of getting familiar with what you are required to respond to it in your season. It is that makes our generation say that yes, we can't call ourselves being stronger, but it is the color of the birthness of a family, the color that a family are being born in is that are being voiced in our generation currently. The color that everyone is excited to go and voice where they find themselves at in their season. Everyone is excited to introduce themselves to someone else because they have gotten to know something else concerning themselves in season. But it is that while we are all excited, we do not just go on and deprive someone else, but we learn to know how to get familiar with the birthness of the oneness of our generation. That is our every requirement in season. That we don't say that everyone else is moving on in season, but we learn to know how to take a step back and allow ourselves to listen, not from an angry mode, not from an ignorant mode, not with excluding one another, not with depriving one another, not with humiliation, but we learn to know how to listen with familiarization, and in order to understand that is one family in one house, and the one family never negotiated that That is our every opportunity. We do not negotiate that. That is our every birthright to appear. We do not negotiate that. That is our every requirement to be fine with where we are at in our season. And we do not negotiate our seasons with nothing, but we allow ourselves to get familiar with what is our season, what is our one voice in season, what is the color of the birthness of a generation in our season and in our generation. It is that we sometimes learn to know what to listen to. Social media especially educates us. What do we listen to? How often do we listen to it? And it is not that you disagree with something. No, it is where you find yourself at in the educative room of your day, right? About educates that the sun comes forth every day, and the sun comes forth with something new every day. And with the something new added, we remind ourselves to step back of the yesterdays that allows ourselves the familiarization of where we find ourselves at in today's. But while our yesterdays is in the currentness of today's, we also allow ourselves to understand the completeness of accepting our day in completion, right? Our day in what we have been educated about, but we understand the voice and the sound of familiarization, that the color that is the brightness of the sun, that some people say the sun's color is yellow, and other people sometimes disagree, and sometimes they say, but it is not only the sun that brings forth that. And then we learn to say the brightness of your reaction and your attitude is that evokes the sun, is that evokes a business awoken purpose, right? It is that your birthright that you allow yourself to be part of, but you allow yourself to get familiar with the protective environment of that is our birthright. It is that social media teaches us that we can discuss many things, right? And we can be part of many conversations in our season, but it is that requirement that social media also requires us to respond to that. That is the generation that we are in, are internationally introduced to one another, and internationally everyone wants to voice where they are at in their season. And internationally, everyone wants to feel like they are the rights concerning the generation's voice, right? But when we are being introduced to one another on social media, we need to learn to understand also our seasons on our social media pages, our seasons of education, our seasons of where we say that we are not going to be abusive to someone else's voice, our seasons that we say that we are not going to be oppressive to someone else in their season, but understanding that our generation internationally are now all on social media, and our requirement on social media is therefore to abide to that is protective, that is respective, and that is the one color of our generation, our birthright, the one voice concerning nature itself, concerning the birds in the sky, yes, concerning the fish in the sea, concerning the dogs that everyone is invited into their households, and everyone wants to educate and say that this is what it is, and we do not negotiate that. Because we have learned that Mama Papa Universe is now not only the church person that is now only gonna live in this church building, but Mama Papa Universe is that is the everything concerning the universe. That the church falls part of it, that religion is part of it, tradition is part of it, different cultural backgrounds, different languages, the different nationalities, the different colors, the different ways of upbringing, the different skin colors, yes, the different ways of speaking and of educating. It is someone else is saying something, and they're not sometimes necessarily arguing, but they are sometimes necessarily requiring everyone to be in the oneness of where they find themselves at in their season. It is, yes, Avoke has got a lot to say, and stronger is all that we're gonna say that sometime in the season that we are in, with all the arguments in our room, we're gonna have to learn to say that, you know what, this was never an argument, but this is actually a discussion in our generation. This is actually an education in our generation. And we're gonna have to learn to say that while someone else wants to put someone else in prison, they have to learn that everyone in our generation was in corruption, right? Everyone in our generation was abusing the other somewhat way, and we're gonna have to be firm about the education in our room, because no one is gonna want to have their day being abused or being abused by. in their season, but we're all gonna have to learn to say that this is a discussion, and this Mama Universe, Papa Universe has allowed us to all listen to the education in season and to get familiar with that, but we are also required to learn to say that this argument is never an argument, but this argument is a one voice, and the one voice is that everyone say that is protection for everyone, that is going to be protective to every one of us, but that requirement that when you know protection and you are in a protective season, then you learn to know how to introduce yourself to someone else who can also sometimes find themselves in that protective environment. It is that we do not close our ears for what is happening, and we do not say that we don't notice what is happening in someone else's lifestyle, but we are also not gonna abuse the situation by being the aggressor in the room, but we are also going to allow ourselves to listen to the protective environment that is meant for everyone in our season. Yes, we have had a lot of challenges that we went through as a generation, but the one thing that we can say concerning being stronger in our season is that we're one family, and the color of the birthness of a generation in season is exactly that, that we had to learn that what is happening in our generation and what happened since 2020 in our generation was never an argument, but it was exactly that, that is the one voice, that is that has someone else be also fine with where they are required to be at. And that birthright, our generation, we do not negotiate about, we do not deprive ourselves of, we do not think it's only meant for us to be part of, but we allow everyone else who's meant to be there where they are required to be at in this season. And that is it for voicing for stronger in this season. I know I had a lot to say, but I always say listen to the recordings again and listen to what we are voicing in season, when we are voicing for the strongness of our generation, for that stronger appearing you, for the stronger you that does not deprive someone else, for the stronger you that understands that our generation is one voice, for the stronger you that learns that our generation's colors are different, but the colors are that is the educative room concerning our generation. We learn that our roads have been drawn, has been educated, the houses were built and constructed in a certain way, and the voice of education came from some part of the universe that looks upon humanity and that wants to once again look at humanity and look at all the stunning colors that is happening around us, and that humanity once again do not deprive themselves of, but humanity once again learn to listen to that is visible, and that sometimes is not visible, that we say that we yet have a lot to educate upon. When we look at disabled people that are sometimes deprived of being part of our generation, when we look at disabled people that are sometimes not yet even on television programs, when we look at disabled people that are sometimes not even working in offices yet, when we look at our generation's one voice, then we learn that we yet have a lot that we still have to abide to and get familiar with in the educative room of our generation, and we therefore allow ourselves to know how to listen so that we can apply that is gonna be protective and that is gonna be respective for everyone and for every color that is the birthness of a generation in season that we as a generation have been introduced to. It is that Rabia Elise had a lot to say, but I want us to understand that the color of a difference is that birthright that you do not negotiate about and you do not deprive someone else. And when we can educate properly, then we do allow for proper education and we do not silence one another out. No, because everything is acceptable, yes, in our generation, but every country has got their reasons why they're educating in a certain season and why they are protective concerning their children in a certain season in their generation. And therefore, it is not that they have any arguments concerning everything that we have been educated about, but it is that they are firm about that is the protective environment for everyone. And every parent, we remember, parented very differently, yes. And our generation, our young people that are now young adults, has to learn that our parents are not saying things because they want to deprive us. No, they are saying it because they are firm about the protectiveness concerning you being the child in the room, and concerning them that are still parenting in that season in their rooms. And that's when we get introduced on social media, and all that social media has got to introduce us of. We learn to respect that is our parents' right, and that our parents sometimes says that, you know what, I'm firm about it, because some children need to get to our level in order to know how to understand and how to be fine in this season. And they can't just want to go on ignorantly and want to just do what they want to do because someone else is not gonna agree with it. And someone else might be depriving someone else when they do not agree with how someone else voices in this season. The stronger us is that learns to know how to take a step back, how to not react, how to not get angry, how to not abuse one another, how to not oppress and deprive one another, how to not be arrogant in our ways, how to learn to know how to apply the right from wrongs, how to understand that people of color is all the colors in the room, how to understand the black and white discussion was never an argument but was a discussion, how to understand that Rabia never entered the room to deprive someone else, but Rabia was there to exactly also say what Rabia was meant to say in a season, because that's the season we found ourselves at. How to say that the protective environment for Rabia when she was at New Orleans Vale Primary School was that voice of Mama Universe that educated her, that while Mama Anna was in the workplace, and while the primary school had lots of challenges that happened around school those years, Mama Anna was not the protector in the room for Rabia, but the protector in the room was Rabia's familiarization with the voice of Mama Universe, of those choices that are rights and are wrongs, what to do, what not to do, where to be at in our season, where not to be at in our season. That protective environment, that is the voice, that is the birthness, the color of the birthness of a generation in the womb that allows themselves to be familiar of every change that happens in a generation. It is there that we're not gonna say that we did not say it, and we are gonna say it, and then we are sometimes arrogant about it, but that we're also not gonna be silenced out when someone else deprives someone else, of another day, or of where they find themselves at in season. We allow ourselves to understand the evenings and the nighttime is acceptable, yes, and we learn to understand that when darkness came forth, when the nighttime came forth, it is that quiet listening time that sometimes Mama Papa Universe in the house of parenting, yes, they sometimes set the table, and they sometimes allow us to listen in quietness of listening. Because of our days that are sometimes so rushed and so busy, we sometimes have to allow ourselves in quietness to understand that night never means darkness, that wearing black clothes never means darkness. No, that wearing black and white never means darkness, but it is that listening and familiarization of the educativeness after a long busy day, and after a day of being in the office, our generation has got that quiet time in the afternoon to once again listen to the educativeness concerning the universe. That is it that we want to say for stronger, and for our discussion with stronger, and for our discussion with not arguing about things that happened in your yesterdays, but with allowing yourself to once again be in the currentness of your todays. That is it for me, Rabia Elise, yes. And that is it for our discussion today. And we therefore want to once again continue to share in our discussions that we have in our room. And we appreciate everyone who listens in, yes, to our recordings. And we can really say that there are sometimes applying what we say on television, yes, and on the television programs. So yes, we thank everyone out there who's listening in and who really listens to our educative voice and who really knows how to implement that in their season with where our generation is at. That is it for today. And we want to also mention that the war arguments and discussions that our generation have, we want to thank a few people today who's really intervening with that process. Yes, the Chinese Chinese government is, that is really intervening with that in our generation, that we don't want to every day switch the television on and then someone else is arguing, but they are really trying to really voice for that is protective for everyone. And when people voice, you don't necessarily go on their mistakes the whole time, but you learn to listen to that they really are sometimes that there is not against the other, right? It is that we have a lot of films that we have watched when we were young and that educated us that this generation is maybe this or that, but we learn when someone gives you a hand of protection and you then decide, are you gonna really take that, or are you gonna be in argumentative? It is that when a baby walks and a baby is in danger and someone else reacts to protect the baby, is that gonna be that you are only now gonna focus on the person's mistakes, or are you gonna allow the person to be where they are really wanting and having to be in their season with voicing for that is protection? It is that we have learned that every country has had their differences. Every country is full of mafia lifestyles, full of gangsterism lifestyles, full of differences. Every leader is full of their own leadership skills. Yes, but while we are at that, we learn that, you know what? We are all being educated, and sometimes we all have to be firm. And sometimes people were never a mafia, but they were maybe in private investigators somewhere. We have learned all of these interesting ways, but it is really protective that our generation learns to understand that such is the womb of this generation, but we also do not deprive one another when we educate in such a way. And when someone says that I give you the hand of protection, then you take that rather than arguing someone else away, right? Then you really learn to understand what protection is and what listening is in our generation. It is that environment that we do not negotiate about, but that environment that requires us sometimes to really respond to that is familiar, that we are familiar with when we are educated concerning the different seasons in a generation. That is it for what I want to voice for today. Have an amazing, stronger season further.